You'll live with a nice hot meal inside you.
Spring can't sprung in frigid temperatures, and that has frontline workers working harder to help the homeless.
It's not gone, but it's not spoken in every household like it was. So,
keeping the Mohawk language alive, the editor of the Eastern Door is helping a major university fulfill a call to action. And APTN National News and Current Affairs is up for a record number of nominations at this year's Canadian Association of Journalists Awards. Good evening, I'm Dennis Ward. Group homes in the Yukon will be getting an independent review on how they're treating kids in their care. And as Shirley McLean reports, one Yukon First Nation hopes to open their own group home where youth can feel like it really is a home.
Auntie's place is a home. It would be a home.
Chief Dorsbill says Auntie's house will be a place for kids in care to break down the emotional walls and to feel like they're at home.
In the absence of your mother, who do you go to for advice? Your auntie, right? So it would be a home that would be built on our values and our beliefs, our holistic, from a holistic point of view.
80% of kids in care in Whitehorse are First Nation, and a high percentage of those kids are from Kwallen-Dun. Chief Bill says she wants to change the narrative and give these kids a step up in life. And she knows from first-hand experience what it's like to be raised in foster care, and says the kids in care need stability.
It's very difficult because just when you begin to trust someone, you're moved. And so after a while, you just don't trust anybody, and you build up walls. And those walls are really, really tough to come down once they're up.
Last month, Yukon government announced there would be an independent review of how group homes are run in the territory, in light of recent allegations of physical abuse at group homes and the lack of programming for kids in care. Bill says the time is right for First Nation kids to have a place within their own community to access their families, elders, and land-based programming.
I'd like to see things move a little faster, but you know, you're moving a great big bureaucracy here, so I think change is coming, but it'll take time.
It's just a concept right now, but with the political will moving forward to make life better for kids in care at the local and national level, the doors to Auntie's home could be opening sooner rather than later. Shirley McLean, APTN National News, Whitehorse.
Being with friends and family for Easter can make it easy to forget about those who are not as fortunate. Hope Mission has not forgotten. They've been providing hot meals and warm beds to the less fortunate in Edmonton for 89 years. Chris Stewart brings us their story.
There are about 1,700 homeless people in Edmonton, and many of those people are receiving help from Hope Mission, especially with the recent cold weather.
Being April, we've still got minus 15, minus 18. And for the community that we serve, I've kind of said that for a lot of them, they're kind of in a long winter themselves, in a season of life maybe that's in crisis. And so whether it's job loss, eviction, whatever reason they find themselves on our doors, they're in need. And homelessness isn't just a deep of the winter type of issue. Homelessness is something that affects people year-round.
Winter has not yet released its grasp in the prairies. Pandani says people still need to prepare for the cold nights.
Socks and underwear are sort of the biggest two needs that we always have, especially actually when you think about the snow melting and the spring thaw coming. If somebody's feet get wet and their socks are wet and the temperatures are still dipping to minus 15 at night, they're in serious danger of frostbite.
Today's meal is served at 11:30. Dozens of people file in to enjoy some good, hot food.
You know, when you come in and you have a meal like this, it keeps your tummy warm, and it does help your midsection stay warm. That's probably the most important part. You know, everything else is still cold, but you'll live with a nice hot meal inside you.
Rosa Rodriguez has been with Hope Mission for 26 years. She knows many here by their first names. She says the work Hope Mission does is vital to helping the people she calls family.
Many of them don't have a house or a home, or a family, so it's very important because we can let them feel like if this is the home for them, cooking for them, and bring their kids, and it make us feel so happy and important in this community.
The people are great here. You know, they make you feel like you want to eat more, not just what you're given. They always give you more, so it makes you feel welcoming.
Homelessness can happen faster than you expect. Hope Mission is there for those who need it.
I was talking with one lady just last week who's got 3 kids in tow. She was carrying everything she owned in a stroller and was just pushing it to and from, and she said, I never thought I would need a place like Hope Mission. But because of the community of supporters and just the big hearts of our city, we were able to be there and care for her in her season of needs.
Chris Stewart, APTN National News, Edmonton.
It's been 7 years since we told you about Molly Boyce, a woman struggling with addiction and trauma. She got herself off booze with the help of Shelter House in Thunder Bay. She pursued an education and last month was valedictorian in her graduating class.
And those were my dark days. You know, I didn't know how to handle the things that I needed to handle, you know, and I think, you know, what really made a difference is someone listened, finally listened, after all this time.
And we will have more on Molly's story later in the week. A pair of members of Parliament plan to bring a motion to the House of Commons they hope will lead to an apology from the Pope to residential school survivors. We'll speak with one of those MPs after the break. Here's a look at Tuesday's weather forecast starting on the East Coast. A sunny 6 above in Fredericton, -2 in St. John's. Sunny and -3 for Happy Valley, Goose Bay, and Cartwright, -14 in La Grande. Cloudy, wet day across much of Quebec. Rain and +6 in Montreal. Rain in southern Ontario as well. 12 above in Windsor, +9 in Sarnia and London. -4 in Wawa and Thunder Bay. Sunny, -9 in Sioux Lookout. Over to Manitoba, -10 in Thompson, -7 in Gimli Harbor, Winnipeg, and Brandon. In Saskatchewan, -6 in Swift Current and Regina, -5 in Estevan, -15 on Tuesday in Stony Rapids and Uranium City. Welcome back. Last week, Pope Francis said he will not apologize to residential school survivors. So MPs Charlie Angus and Romeo Saganash wrote the Prime Minister asking him to get Canadian bishops to convince their boss to reconsider. Charlie Angus joins us now from Toronto. Mr. Angus, thanks for joining us today. In addition to an apology, what else are you asking the Catholic Church to do?
Well, one of the real problems we've seen in Canada on the issue of reconciliation is the failure of the Catholic Church to really do its part in terms of understanding the importance of the calls to action of the TRC and to repairing the damage that was done. So the fact that the Catholic bishops have decided not to invite Pope Francis to come to Canada to issue that formal apology is deeply disturbing. It's equally disturbing that the Catholic Church managed to walk away on the $25 million it was supposed to pay to the survivors. And we've seen a general reluctance on the various Catholic orders who were involved in the torture and abuse of children to turn over documents. Because of that, my colleague Romeo Saganash and I have written a letter to the Prime Minister in the Easter season, in the season of renewal within the Church, to say if the Catholic bishops are not willing to take up this cause, then Parliament needs to say to them, in the interest of national reconciliation, in reparation for the horrific crimes that were committed, the Catholic bishops need to step up and certainly make the formal call to the Pope for an apology.
Why do you think the Prime Minister can influence the Pope's decision on whether to come forward with this apology?
Well, I certainly have enormous amount of faith in Pope Francis. He has been a fighter for justice. He's certainly broken the mold in terms of reaching out to the marginalized around the world, and he seems to care deeply about these issues. Our problem is that my understanding is he needs a formal request from the Canadian bishops, and they're not stepping up to the plate. It's certainly unprecedented that Parliament would call upon the Canadian Catholic Church to take action, but it's also unprecedented, I think, to watch in 2018 an institution as powerful as the Catholic Church that was so deeply involved in the torture and abuse and destruction of the Indigenous children's identity in the residential schools not to be willing to step up this time. I'm flabbergasted that the Church is not taking these issues of reconciliation and the call for forgiveness as seriously as Canadians are taking it.
When are you hoping to bring the motion forward?
We will be introducing the motion in the House next week. We've talked to people who are very interested in a national petition to start putting the pressure on. We will find a moment to bring this forward for debate. I certainly think it's really unfortunate that Parliament has to raise this pressure on the Canadian bishops. I know that a fundamental factor of the Catholic faith is the issue of justice, the issue of supporting the marginalized, and the need to say forgiveness when you've done wrong. So I would like the Canadian Catholic bishops to do the right thing and recognize that it's time to make amends for the residential school horrors and to ask the Pope to be part of that process with us.
In 2006, the Catholic Church was let off the hook for raising funds for survivors. How can you put them back on the hook at this point?
Well, I think it's really unconscionable that the Catholic Church managed to find a legal loophole to avoid paying some of the compensation to the survivors of horrific abuse in schools like St. Anne's Residential School, where I still deal with almost on a daily basis with survivors of that institution of terror. What we have is the moral call of Parliament to say to the Catholic Church, you know, you got off on a legal technicality, you tried to avoid your responsibility, but to be a moral force in this country in 2018, to be a voice of genuine reconciliation, the Catholic Church of Canada needs to say they've done wrong and be willing to work with Indigenous people to repair these breaches. So I think what we have on our side is the moral force of history, and I'd like to know that the Catholic Church is standing there with us.
Do you believe an apology would be welcomed, especially by survivors of St. Anne's Residential School?
I think apologies are very powerful and healing moments. How do we move forward until the institution that caused that horrific suffering acknowledges it? You know, for some, apologies will never be enough, and it's not for me to say whether this apology is sufficient or not, but it is one of the calls of action of the Truth and Reconciliation. I believe it is something that Pope Francis should want to do. I believe he would want to be there to make these amends, and I just really find it unfortunate that we have to take this into the political realm to shake the Catholic bishops up and say, this is 2018. You really need to be accountable for what happened, and you need to say sorry.
Well, Mr. Angus, we'll see what happens with your motion there next week. We appreciate you taking the time to join us.
Well, thank you so much.
All year, we've been running a series of perspective stories on the child welfare system and the challenges kids face. APTN video journalist Tina House has been shooting a series on kids that have aged out of the system. Here's a preview from the next piece in her series.
This is all for you, Santana. Love you and miss you so much. At first I hung up the phone because I didn't want to believe it. I called my mom back right away and got the news, and victim services were with my mom, and it was very tragic.
Those that age out of group homes and out of youth agreements, so they're already living on their own, I think many of them are unsure what's going to happen next.
For more now, Tina House joins us from our Vancouver bureau. Tina, good to see you. What have you learned in meetings with the kids that have aged out of CFS?
Well, I've certainly learned that they've had an incredible amount of challenges throughout their life. At such a young age, they've overcome many obstacles First of all, being taken away from their families and friends that they know of. Many of them actually going to many different foster homes and trying to form a connection with those foster parents and then being uprooted and taken to another home. So they've been through an awful lot, and it's been a real pleasure to meet many of them that have been so brave enough to share their story with me.
Have you noticed the trend at all with what you've learned with some of the youth you've met?
You know, actually I have. Oftentimes during the interview, while I'm meeting with the kids, you know, we'll start to talk about their lives and certainly the lives of their parents and their grandparents. And what I'm actually finding is that residential school has an awful lot to do with many of the cases that I've uncovered. In one of the cases, one of the youth told me that her grandmother was in residential school. Her mother was then put into foster care. She was put into foster care, and then now her daughter's in foster care. So I'm finding a real trend with a direct link between residential school and the traumas that many people suffered there, and then now that's filtering through to the broken families that we're seeing in the child and welfare system. The other thing that I'm noticing as well is after these kids age out, I would say about 3 out of the 6 that I've met so far, these kids end up going back home to the parents that they were originally taken away from. So it's very interesting how that's happening.
Tina, what's happening on the front lines that are helping some of these youth?
Well, I've met some incredible people, certainly working very hard on the front lines to help these kids. One organization that comes to mind is Lumen Native Housing. Not only are they offering a safe haven for these kids and offering them studio apartments and that sort of thing, but also social programs. Everything from employment to life skills training to mentorship training, everything you can think of. In fact, Mondays and Wednesday nights they offer a dinner as well as training opportunities for these kids to come, and then they offer them, you know, bus passes or gift certificates for grocery stores, that kind of thing. There's also others that are working hard in the front lines, including a group called agedout.com. They have a website for kids that they can log on to this website and literally get all the information that they need to become a young adult. So learning how to apply for their identification, you know, learning about other peer groups that can support them. There's a lot of people that are really working hard on the front lines, and it's just been an amazing opportunity to see that happening.
And Tina, you've got a second part of your series on kids that have aged out. What can we expect from that?
Well, we're going to be talking about a very tragic case of a young lady who aged out of the system. Exactly 7 months after she aged out of the system, she was found dead in a tent alongside a busy highway in Surrey, BC. And I meet with her sister and try to get the root of the situation for their family and what happened, and you know, certainly some of the cracks that she fell through, including in the social services area as well as the community area. So I think that we're going to be really highlighting the tragic case of that young lady that lost her life, and hopefully shedding some light on what can be done differently to help kids from suffering that same fate.
Well, Tina, it's some important work. We look forward to part 2 and appreciate you taking some time to speak with us today.
Absolutely. Thank you so much.
It's awards season for journalists, and this year, APTN has a record number of nominations. More on that after the break. Here's the rest of Tuesday's weather forecast, picking back up in northern Alberta, -10 in High Level and Fort McMurray. Cloudy and 6 below in Red Deer and Calgary. On the west coast, +10 in Victoria and Vancouver, +8 in Bella Coola with rain. 0 in Prince George and Smithers, -5 in East Lake. In Yukon, -6 in Dawson City and Whitehorse. Over to NWT, -11 in Fort Simpson and Wrigley. 20 below on Tuesday in Sax Harbor, -25 in Polituck. A mild day in Nunavut, -11 in Arviette and Whale Cove, -10 in Baker Lake, -6 on Tuesday in Iqaluit, -3 in Pangertung. Welcome back. Concordia University is moving forward on one of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission's calls for action. Steve Bonspiel has been selected as Concordia's journalist in residence for the winter 2018 semester. Since January, Bontsville has conducted 6 students with a special project about the Mohawk language in 2 communities. The multimedia project's goal is to interview grassroots people who want to keep and revitalize the endangered language, but also helping it in some ways and bringing it back.
It's not gone, but it's not spoken in every household like it was. So I think to have non-native students tackle something like that and now be able to give the right information to people, that has a lot more impact than me. I mean, I could sit there and I could say, we should fight for Mohawk, and people say, well, yeah, he always says that. But if you have these students who, even 3 months ago knew nothing about it, and now they're doing a project on it and learning about it, I mean, that's reconciliation at its finest.
And we'll have more on that story later in the week. The Canadian Association of Journalists recognizes excellence in news and investigative reporting. APTN has won several CAJ awards. This year, we have a record number of nominations. Here's a look at some of them. APTN has 2 nominations in the open broadcast category, both from Investigates. Holly Moore's The Cure Was Worse.
He would share examples of carts being brought into the dormitory with different colored liquids, and children being made to drink different colored liquids, with medical staff standing around them with clipboards documenting every reaction.
And Rob Smith is nominated for Killer Pain.
I have to. I'm addicted to fentanyl. My tolerance is way up there.
Kathleen Martin's Holly Moore and Paul Barnsley are nominated in Open Broadcast News for Truth or Reconciliation. Their investigation revealing how residential school survivors were shortchanged in the compensation process. Willow Fiddler and Kenneth Jackson are in the Scoop category for their joint investigation into the death of Tammy Kiash. Kenneth Jackson is also a finalist in the Daily Excellence category for his investigation into the deaths of 3 First Nation girls who died while in foster care. In the Journalist for Human Rights category, APTN has 2 nominees. Colin Crozier, who earlier won a Canadian Screen Award for this same story, Against Their Will.
I can't move. I'm frozen from the waist down. And I said, I don't want to do this.
And Trina Roach has won this award before, but this time she is nominated for In the Shadow of the Dam.
If there was reconciliation, I wouldn't have gone to prison.
Kathleen Martins is also nominated for the CAJ Award for Labor Reporting. Her piece, Article 23, looked at the failure of Nunavut to meet its goal of hiring a majority of Inuit.
Our government is supposed to have 85% of Inuit working for the government and train Inuits. Right now it's less than 40%.
And finally, there is a new award this year honoring an emerging Indigenous journalist. Willow Fiddler, APTN's Thunder Bay video journalist, made the shortlist. And congrats to all of our colleagues for the great work this past year. That is your APTN National News for this Monday. For more, visit our website, aptnnews.ca. Up next, an encore presentation of Clash at Standing Rock on APTN Investigates. I'm Dennis Ward. Have a great night. We'll see you back here tomorrow.